Detroit, Michigan, the Motor City. In 1940, its factories produced the most beautiful automobiles the world has ever seen. Gleaming Cadillacs, powerful Buicks, sleek Chryslers, dependable Fords, and prestigious Packards. Chrome, steel, speed. But within a single year, the shine would disappear. And the real question is, how do you turn a car factory into a weapons factory? How do you take men who built family sedans and ask them to build bombers, or better yet, ask their wives to do that? And here's something to consider. Could modern American industry retool that fast today? Let me know what you think in the comments, because what happened next would not just change Detroit, it would help decide the fate of the world.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
On December 7th, 1941, the world changed. Within days of Pearl Harbor, President Franklin Roosevelt called on American industry to become what he famously named the arsenal of democracy. The United States had the manpower, it had the raw materials, but it did not yet have the weapons. And nowhere on earth was industrial production more advanced than in Detroit. The auto industry, built for mass production, suddenly faced a new critical mission. No more chrome trim, no more tailfins, no more sleek body designs. Instead, it's now tanks and bombers and bullets. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, Detroit's auto factories faced an unbelievable challenge. Stop building cars and start building weapons for World War II. Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, and Packard shut down their automobile production lines and completely retooled their factories. Assembly lines that once built sedans, cars, and trucks were redesigned to produce tanks, aircraft engines, and military vehicles. It was a massive undertaking, removing gigantic machines and presses only to replace them with new and larger, massive machines and presses. The sheer manpower and equipment to move these multi-storied giants was an undertaking that was met by the auto industry with breakneck speed. GM, Ford, Chrysler, and Packard all came together for this incredible undertaking. From competitors to team players, the auto industry united together to retool for the war effort. The workers of Detroit, many of them women entering factories for the first time, turned the Motor City into the arsenal of democracy, the very main ingredient for Roosevelt's program. At the start of the United States entering the war, America needed massive amounts of steel to build tanks, ships, aircraft, and artillery. But producing new steel from raw materials took time, and the war didn't wait. The government launched huge national scrap drives. Americans were asked to donate anything made of metal, and old automobiles became one of the biggest sources. Junkyards filled with pre-war cars, Fords, Chevrolets, Buicks, Chryslers, even Packards, were stripped down, crushed, and melted in steel mills all across the country. That recycled metal was then used to produce Sherman tanks, Liberty ships, aircraft parts, and thousands of other critical wartime machines. In fact, some historians estimate that millions of tons of scrap metal, including countless old cars, helped fuel America's wartime production boom. And that fuel is just what Detroit needed to begin production. A production that Detroit automakers had never before retooled for. Henry Ford had built his entire empire on the moving assembly line. Now, that same moving assembly line would be building something far larger than a Model T. At Willow Run, Ford constructed one of the largest factories in the world, and it was designed to produce only one thing: the B-24 Liberator bomber. And not just a few bombers. At its peak, Ford was producing one B-24 every 63 minutes. Stop and think about that. A 4-engine heavy bomber every hour. Over 8,600 B-24s would roll out of Willow Run during the war, and that is more than any other bomber manufacturer in history. Ford also produced Jeep engines and Jeeps, Pratt & Whitney aircraft engines, military trucks, M4 Sherman tank components, anti-submarine patrol boats. The company that once perfected mass-producing cars was now mass-producing air and ground power. Imagine walking into the Willow Run plant, or any Ford plant for that matter, that once was echoing the sound of car doors being fitted, but now is roaring with rivet guns building bombers. If Ford built bombers, General Motors built almost everything else. Through its many divisions, Chevrolet, Buick, Cadillac, Oldsmobile, Pontiac, GM became the single largest war producer on Earth. GM manufactured aircraft engines. In fact, they made over 57,000 of them. M4 Sherman tanks, tank destroyers, machine guns, naval guns, artillery shells, military trucks, submarine engines. The Cadillac division alone produced over 10,000 tanks. Buick built aircraft engines. Oldsmobile manufactured cannons. Think about that. The same company that sold family cars in 1941 was producing the firepower to land at Normandy by 1944. And here's a question for you. Which do you think was harder, designing the weapons or figuring out how to mass produce them? Tell me what your thoughts are, because scale was everything. Walter Chrysler had built his reputation on engineering excellence. When war came, Chrysler answered with the Detroit Arsenal Tank Plant in Warren, Michigan. It became the most productive tank factory in American history. Chrysler produced nearly 25,000 tanks, including the legendary M3 Lee and the famous M4 Sherman. But Chrysler also produced aircraft engines, radar equipment, anti-aircraft guns. The arsenal ran around the clock. 3 shifts a day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The sheer output was staggering, and at its height, the plant completed a tank every hour. Picture that for a moment, if you will. An armored vehicle capable of crossing Europe, rolling off an assembly line that once built prestigious passenger cars. Not to be outdone by the Big Three of Detroit, Packard, known for luxury and refinement, turned its precision manufacturing towards something extremely critical: the Rolls-Royce Merlin aircraft engine. Under license, Packard built over 55,000 Merlin engines in Detroit. Those engines powered the P-51 Mustang, the Spitfire, and the Lancaster bomber. Some historians argue the Packard-built Merlins gave the Allies air superiority over Europe. And we know that without air superiority, there is no D-Day. Let that sink in. A luxury car company helped win control over the skies of Europe. But there were other smaller car manufacturers that were just as important to the war effort as the ones I just previously mentioned. For example, Hudson produced aircraft parts and naval components. Studebaker built US-6 military tanks, thousands of which were sent to the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease. Aircraft engines, weasel-tracked vehicles for snow and rough terrain. Even American Motors predecessor companies contributed engines and other military components. Detroit wasn't just building weapons, it was building mobility. It was building logistics. And wars are won or lost by logistics. But factories don't win wars. People do. When millions of men went overseas, women stepped into the factories. Rosie the Riveter wasn't just some cute poster to drive war bonds. She was the real deal. By 1943, women made up nearly 40% of the industrial workforce. They welded bombers. They assembled engines. They inspected artillery shells. Many had never worked outside the home before. African American workers also gained industrial jobs that were previously denied to them, though often still segregated and unfortunately unequal. The war reshaped not just production, but society itself. Between 1941 and 1945, American industry produced nearly 300,000 aircraft, over 86,000 tanks, more than 2.5 million trucks, millions of rifles, machine guns, and artillery pieces. And Detroit was the center of it all. Germany and Japan simply could not match that output. Hitler built advanced weapons, but America built more of everything. And in modern industrial warfare, quantity has a quality all its own. And then, almost as suddenly as it began, it ended. In 1945, the factories retooled again. Bombers gave way to Buicks. Tanks gave way to tailfins. Returning soldiers found jobs waiting in plants that had just helped win the war. The same assembly lines that built destruction now built prosperity. The American middle class expanded. Suburbs grew. The automobile became king once again. But here is the question that really lingers. Was Detroit's greatest achievement the cars it built, or the war it helped win? And here's something even deeper to consider. If America faced the same level of crisis today, could we unite industry, labor, and government the way we did in 1942? I want to hear your thoughts. Because the story of Detroit in World War II isn't just about machines. It's about resolve. It's about adaptability. It's about a nation that turned assembly lines into lifelines for freedom. The arsenal of democracy. And for a brief moment in history, the factories of Detroit helped change the world. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider clicking on one of the links in the video description to help support this channel. Have a wonderful day, and you all be blessed.